My own son, the youngest one, kicked me out of my own house. He didn't even look me in the eyes when he said it. He just stood in front of me with his arms crossed and told me coldly, "Dad, you can't live here anymore. Emily's parents are moving in with us. There's no more room for you." Just like that, without his voice trembling, as if I were a piece of old furniture that was no longer useful. In less than an hour, his in-laws were already walking through the front door with their suitcases. And I, with my few belongings, walked out the back. But what my son didn't know was that the house was still in my name. My name is Matthew Roberts. I'm 73 years old, and I'm no fool. I've been a builder since I was 14, and with my own two hands, I built houses, schools, entire town squares. Even the house where I raised my 3 children. I worked under the sun in the rain, with a bent back and hands full of calluses so they would never go hungry. And now, after all that, one of them, the one I helped the most spoiled one, was the one who threw me out as if I didn't matter anymore. I'm not a man of many words. I've always been a man of action. When my wife died 8 years ago, I felt like a part of me died too, but I didn't let that defeat me. I kept going. I focused on taking care of my youngest son, who still lived with me. He said he wanted to study, that he wanted to start his own business, and I helped him. I paid for his courses, bought him tools, I even gave him the land where we built that house. But there was one condition. The property would remain in my name until he was truly responsible. I never imagined that detail would be what saved me from humiliation. The day he kicked me out, I remember I didn't even feel anger at first. I felt empty, like something inside me had broken. I left with a backpack, a change of clothes, and the property deed hidden at the bottom. I walked to the neighborhood square. I sat on a bench, and I stayed there for hours, watching people pass by, not knowing what to do. But the more I thought, the clearer it became. I wasn't going to let them treat me like this. I wasn't going to stay silent. I managed to spend that night at the house of an old friend, Larry, who I worked with decades ago. I told him everything, and he just said, "You don't deserve this. Do what you have to do." The next day, I went straight to the county recorder's office. I hadn't been there in years, but they still knew me. I requested an updated copy of the house title, and there it was, crystal clear, no mistakes. The legal owner was still me. Neither my son nor his in-laws had any right to that house. And in that moment, something inside me lit up. I decided I wasn't going to act with shouting or threats. I was going to do things the right way, with papers, with the law. Because when you have the truth on your side, you don't need to raise your voice. I hired a lawyer. I showed him all the documents, told him what happened, and he looked at me seriously. Then he nodded. "Mr. Roberts, what they did to you is unspeakable. But we can fix this." In less than 2 weeks, my lawyer filed for an eviction order for unlawful occupancy. I didn't say anything to my son. I didn't call, I didn't argue. I just waited for the right moment. And while I waited, I remembered. I remembered the birthdays we celebrated in that house, the Christmases with old country music, the Sunday barbecues in the backyard, and how my son, as a child, would hang from my neck shouting, "Dad, you're my hero." When did all that change? When did I stop being his hero and become a burden? Sometimes life forces us to wake up late, but better late than never. That same son who once said, "I don't have a father, I have a rock on my shoulders," was about to understand what it meant to lose what you take for granted. Because it's one thing to kick out an old man, and another thing entirely to kick out a man who still has his dignity. I don't know if he thought I'd never dare, that I'd stay quiet, resigned, sitting on a bench waiting for an apology. But I didn't come into this world to be anyone's doormat, not my son's, not anyone's. And if he forgot that, then he was about to receive a lesson that would be burned into his memory for the rest of his life. A week after submitting the documents to the lawyer, I got a call. It was from the courthouse. The eviction order had been approved. The officer told me that in 3 days my son would receive the official notice and he would have a deadline to leave the house. I didn't need to do anything else. I didn't lift a single finger against him. I didn't confront him. I didn't yell at him. I just let the law speak for me and for all the years he had chosen to forget. I stayed those days at Larry's house eating beans and fresh corn tortillas, sleeping on an old cot that creaked with every move but sleeping in peace because I no longer carried that rage in my chest. What I felt now was something else, something colder, firmer. It was the certainty that I was doing the right thing. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. Because you don't do that to a father, and especially not to a father who gave you everything. The day the officers arrived at my house, I wasn't there. I didn't want to be. I didn't need to see my son's face when he read the papers. I could imagine it, of course. Walking barefoot through the living room, hearing the doorbell ring, opening it lazily thinking it was the food delivery guy, and suddenly seeing the court officer holding out the sealed envelope. I can imagine the exact moment he saw the name that signed that order. Matthew Roberts, his own father. That afternoon, not even an hour passed before my cell phone rang. It was him. I didn't answer. He called 3 more times. Then came a flood of messages. Some were insults, others were pleas. He said, how dare I, that his wife's parents had nowhere to go, that how could I leave him on the street? He asked if I didn't love him anymore, if I had gone crazy. But the funny thing was that in none of those messages was there an apology, not a single word of regret. That night, I slept more peacefully than ever. And the next day, I went to the house. Yes, my house. I arrived slowly without warning. The front was neglected. There was trash at the entrance, and the plants I had cared for years were dry, abandoned. I knocked on the door. My son's wife opened it. She looked at me as if she'd seen a ghost. Her face was pale. Behind her, her parents were packing in a hurry. Suitcases, blankets, even a blender wrapped in a towel. No one said anything. They just walked out, one by one, with their heads down. My son appeared at the end of the hallway. His eyes were red. I don't know if from crying or from lack of sleep. He looked at me, and for a second I thought I saw the boy I raised, the one who would run to me when I came home from work. But I didn't say anything, and neither did he. He just walked past me, dragging his suitcase. As he left, he muttered something barely audible. "You went too far, Dad." And I, without raising my voice, replied, "No, son. You went too far first." When I closed the door, the silence inside the house was heavy. I walked through the halls. Everything was different. The furniture was new. The family photos were gone. In their place, modern, cold, soulless paintings. I went to my room, or what used to be my room. They had turned it into an office. No trace of my things. Only an old chair remained, the same one where I used to sit and read in the afternoons. I sat down. And there I let myself cry. I cried for the betrayal, for the distance, for everything I gave, and everything that wasn't valued. I cried because I didn't want to reach this point. Because deep down, everything I did in my life was for them, for my children. But you can't let yourself be walked all over just because you love someone. You have to set boundaries even if it hurts. Because if you don't, you lose yourself. The days passed. I started to fix up the house little by little. I planted flowers in the garden again. I painted the walls. I put back the portraits of my wife, my grandchildren, my parents. That place became my home again. Not just a roof, but a space full of history, of roots, because I wasn't finished. I still had a lot to give, not to those who rejected me, but to myself. My son tried to contact me several times after that. He wrote me letters. He looked for me at the market. He asked acquaintances to talk to me, but he never apologized. He never admitted what he did. He only said that he needed me, that I was his dad. But son, being a father isn't a title you repeat for convenience. It's a bond that you take care of, or it breaks. I don't have hate in my heart. I didn't raise him to destroy him. But I'm not willing to give away my dignity either. I don't have much time left in this life, I know. But what I have left, I want to live in peace, without fake smiles, without carrying guilt that doesn't belong to me. And it was on one of those days, while I was sorting through some boxes in the closet, that I found an old notebook. My notes were there, and my accounts, my memories. And on the first page, written in my handwriting from years ago, it said, "Everything I have is for those who know how to value it." I closed that notebook, and I promised myself that's how it would be. One morning, while I was sitting on the porch having my coffee and a pastry, I saw the mailman pass by. He left me a white envelope with no return address. When I opened it, I saw a handwritten page with a script I recognized immediately. It was from Emily, my son's wife. "Mr. Roberts," it began, "you can't imagine how much what you did affected my family. My parents are now living with my sister in another state. We are going through a lot of difficulties. But I'm not writing to ask for your help, but so you know that despite everything, I still don't understand why you took the house from us." I folded the letter carefully. I put it on the table. I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. Did she really not understand? Did she not understand that what they did was like stabbing me in the back, that the house was never theirs, that they simply occupied a space that didn't belong to them and kicked me out as if I were an intruder? It wasn't revenge, ma'am. It was justice. A justice you never thought I'd have the courage to seek. The days continued peacefully. I started getting back to my routine. Sometimes I'd go to the town market, other times to the church, where I always sat in the back pew. Some acquaintances would approach me to ask why my son was no longer around the neighborhood. Not everyone knew the story, and I had no need to tell it. I would just respond with a calm smile. He went his own way. Because even though I had every right to say more, I preferred silence. Sometimes silence says much more than 1,000 words. One afternoon, while I was watering the plants in the garden, I heard footsteps approaching on the sidewalk. I turned around. It was my grandson, Ethan. He was about 15. He came with a backpack and a doubtful expression on his face. He greeted me respectfully, but with a mix of shyness and sadness. "Can I come in, Grandpa?" he asked. I nodded and invited him to sit in the shade. We spent more than an hour without talking about what mattered. He told me about school, his friends, how his mom now had to work more hours. I just listened. I knew that at some point he would say what he really came to say. And he did. Just as he was about to get up, he looked me in the eyes and said, "Dad is not doing well. He can't stop talking about you. He says it was unfair. But he doesn't say it with anger. He says it with shame." I sighed. I patted his shoulder and replied calmly, "Your dad made decisions, and decisions have consequences. But you, son, are not to blame for anything. This will always be your home, too." I gave him a long hug, one of those that heals, and I watched him walk away down the same path he had come, with his shoulders a little straighter and his eyes a little clearer. That night, I kept thinking about how one bad decision can break a family, but also how time sometimes heals, even if it doesn't erase, even if it doesn't repair everything. Some things break and can't be put back together the same way, but still you can move on. With scars, yes, but also with dignity. A few days later, I went back to the recorder's office with my lawyer. I asked him to draft a new will. I did not include my youngest son's name. Did it hurt? Of course it hurt. But it was necessary. Instead, I put Ethan's name, and I made it very clear. If one day he respects me as a man and as a grandfather, he will have the right to everything. But only if he learns to recognize the value of his roots. I'm not looking for revenge. I never was. I just wanted them to understand that a father is not disposable, that an old man still feels, still thinks, still has memories, and that when justice doesn't come with shouting, it comes with facts. And so little by little I started coming back to myself. I began to reclaim my small pleasures, my little vegetable garden, my old radio with country music, my notebook of poems from my youth. Because even though my family turned their back on me, I didn't turn my back on myself. It was a Thursday morning when everything started moving again. The lawyer called me early while I was sweeping the patio. "Mr. Roberts," he said, "there's something you need to know. Your son has filed a motion to try to reclaim the house, alleging that you are acting out of spite and that he and his family were unfairly left on the street." I was silent for a few seconds. Not because I was surprised, but because it was like watching the wound try to bleed again, just when it had started to heal. "And what do we do?" I asked without raising my voice. "Nothing, Mr. Roberts. We have all the documents. He has no way to prove anything. But you should know that he is going to try to confront you." I thanked him for the call, hung up the phone, and stood there looking at the freshly swept floor. Seriously, after everything. He still had the audacity to fight for a house he didn't build, didn't pay for, and didn't respect. That same afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Mrs. Clark, a lifelong neighbor, a wise woman, the kind who knows everything that happens in the neighborhood without leaving her garden. She knocked on my door gently, and when I opened it, she greeted me with a sad look. "Matthew, your son was here. He was asking if you were alone, if there was a way to approach you." I thanked her for the information, but I didn't say anything more because what hurt me wasn't that he was asking about me. It was that he only did it after running out of options. Sometimes you think that with age you become immune to certain things, but you don't. Every time someone mentioned his name, I felt something in my stomach. Not hate, not anger. Something more like disappointment wrapped in love, because a father's love doesn't disappear. It becomes silent like a river that continues to flow underground, even if you can no longer see it on the surface. A week later, I received an official letter. It was the notification of the motion my son had filed. I read it completely, word for word. It said that I was unstable, that I no longer thought clearly, that I had acted out of spite and the confusion typical of my age. When I finished reading it, I didn't tear it up. I saved it, because one day, when he is old, I want him to read it so he can understand how much it hurts to be treated as if you're no longer useful, as if experience, years, gray hair are a defect and not a blessing. My lawyer responded to the letter firmly. There was no need to exaggerate. The facts spoke for themselves. The deed to the house, the records, the witnesses, everything was clear. It was only a matter of time before my son's desperate attempt came to nothing. And deep down I already knew it. But I needed to go through that last chapter to truly close it. A few weeks passed, and one ordinary afternoon as the sun was beginning to set, I heard footsteps on the sidewalk again. I peeked through the window. It was him, my son, alone, with his hands in his pockets. He was walking slowly like someone who doesn't know if they are coming or going. I stood motionless, watching. I didn't go out. I didn't open the door. I just watched him stop in front of the house, look up, and stand still, as if waiting for something. Maybe a sign, maybe a word. But he didn't get one because I didn't offer one. After a few minutes, he turned around and left. And I don't know if it was pain or relief that I felt, maybe a mixture of both. But that night, I slept soundly, for the first time in a long time, without dreams, without startling awake, because I understood that sometimes love is also knowing when to close the door, even if it breaks your soul to do it. A few days later, I ran into Ethan again. He came to bring me some bread his mom had made. He hugged me tightly as if he knew I needed it, and he told me something I will never forget. "Grandpa, no matter what happens, thank you for teaching me to have dignity." And that was worth more than any apology that never came. Because if just one grandson understands, if just one learns, then none of this was in vain. And so I continued with my coffee in the mornings, my garden slowly coming back to life, and my soul breathing again. Because you don't need a full house to feel complete. Sometimes it's enough to have a peaceful heart, and to know that even if the world has turned its back on you, you remained standing. That morning I woke up earlier than usual. It had rained during the night, and the smell of wet earth brought back memories of when I built this house with my own hands. I was just over 30 years old then. My children were small. They ran barefoot among the bricks and bags of cement. We didn't have much, but there was joy. And now, standing in front of that same window, looking at the same garden I used to water with my wife by my side, I felt that this place had changed. Not just because of what they did, but because of what I learned after they did it. I went to the kitchen, made my coffee, toasted a piece of bread with butter, and sat in my old wooden chair, the one that creaks every time I move. From there, I could see the street. The neighborhood wasn't the same. Lots of new neighbors, many remodeled houses, but I was still here. Firm. And in silence, I began to write in my notebook. Not a letter, not a complaint, but a kind of testimony, a way to leave in writing what I lived through, so that one day whoever wants to understand can read it. Today I understood. I wrote that one does not grow old because of the years, but because of the wounds left open. And the worst ones are those inflicted by your own children. As I was writing, I heard a knock on the garden gate, not forceful, but a soft tap, like with knuckles. I peeked out the window. It was Ethan again. He came alone with a small bag in his hand. I opened it and offered for him to come in. "No, Grandpa, I just came to drop this off." "It's from Mom. She said it was your favorite meal." It was a special rice dish made just how I liked it, with sesame seeds on top, and tortillas wrapped in a kitchen towel. I thanked him from the heart. "And she also asked me to tell you that she doesn't agree with what Dad did, that she only went along out of fear, out of pressure, that what happened wasn't fair." I sighed. I put a hand on his shoulder and replied, "Son, we all have to learn to be responsible for our actions. Sometimes fear makes us act poorly, but that doesn't erase the damage we cause." He looked at me in silence, and before he left, he said, "I do value you, Grandpa. I do remember everything you did." And he left, walking slowly, as if the conversation weighed on him. But I was left with a new sense of relief in my chest, because if one branch of the tree is still healthy, there is hope. Later that day, I received a call from an unknown number. I answered cautiously. It was the lawyer. He informed me that my son's motion had been officially denied. He tried everything, he told me, but the law is clear. You acted correctly within your rights. He can no longer claim anything. I closed my eyes and felt a kind of rest, not of triumph, because this wasn't a victory. It was simply the end of a legal wound. The rest, the emotional part that was still healing. I decided to go for a walk. I went to the town center. I passed by the square where I used to take my children when they were little. I sat on the old bench, the one with a loose plank, for more than 10 years. I stayed there watching people pass by, the couples, the grandparents with their grandchildren, the street vendors, and I realized something. You can have every right to feel hurt, to seek justice, but you also have a duty not to let that wound turn to poison. Because while I didn't deserve what they did to me, I also didn't want that pain to define me. When I got back home, I found a letter at the door. It wasn't in an envelope, just folded. It was from my son. It said, "Dad, forgive me, not for what I did, but for not understanding sooner everything that you were. I lost something that can't be recovered. I lost your trust. And even if you don't let me come back, I just want you to know that I see it now. That now I finally understand." I held the letter in my hand for a long time. I didn't answer it. There was no need. Because some apologies arrive when they are no longer useful. Not because they don't sting, but because they come after respect has been lost. And without respect, no apology can rebuild what was broken. That night I opened my notebook again. I wrote another line. There is no worse abandonment than the one disguised as maturity. Because there are children who think they are growing up when what they are really doing is forgetting those who raised them. I ate dinner alone but in peace and went to sleep with a lighter heart. Because I understood that I am not less for being alone. I am more for having known how to choose not to stay where I was no longer valued. The next morning, as I was preparing my breakfast, something inside me told me it was time to put an end to all of it. I'm not talking about forgetting. Because you don't forget being kicked out of your own house. But I am talking about taking the reins, about letting go of what no longer belonged to me and looking forward again. I prepared strong coffee the way I liked it when I worked construction and sat down in front of a blank sheet of paper, not to write a complaint, but to do something I had never done before. To write my story with all its truths. I started at the beginning. My name is Matthew Roberts. I was born in a small town down south where men learn to work before they learn to talk. I was a bricklayer, a carpenter, a father, a husband, and although life never gave me luxuries, I always had the most important thing: respect. But one day, the respect I gave was not returned to me. With every sentence, I felt a lump in my throat. Because words don't just tell, they also set you free. And I needed to let go. I was already 3 pages in when someone knocked on the door. It was Mrs. Clark, my neighbor. She came with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Cornbread, Matthew, the kind your wife used to like. I was thinking of you both this morning." I thanked her with all my heart. I invited her in, but she only sat for a moment on the doorstep. "I've seen you looking more peaceful these days," she said, "as if you've finally let go of the weight." I nodded because yes, something had changed in me. Maybe not on the outside, but on the inside. I wasn't the same person. That afternoon, I went for a walk with my cane. Not because I absolutely needed it, but because it gave me a rhythm. I passed by the market, greeted some old friends, and ended up sitting on my usual bench, the one facing the church. I ran into Father Julian, a good man who had known me for years. He sat next to me without saying much. Sometimes the silence between two people who understand each other is more valuable than 1,000 pieces of advice. Matthew, he said after a while, life takes many turns, and it doesn't always end as we expect. But you have done something that many don't dare to do. You set boundaries. And that, too, is a form of love. I didn't know what to say. I just took a deep breath as if letting those words sink deep into my soul. Because yes, setting boundaries isn't resentment, it's self-love. When I returned home, I found a bag hanging on the gate. Inside a box of local sweets, an old photo of me with my 3 children, and a note. Even if you don't believe it, Dad, we still think about you. It wasn't signed, but I knew who had left it. I stared at that picture for a long time. It was from when they were children. I was hugging them, everyone was smiling, and for a moment I remembered what it was like to be an admired father. But the nostalgia didn't bring tears this time. Just a melancholic peace, like someone who understands that time doesn't stop. But neither does dignity. That night I returned to my notebook. I wrote with a firm hand. You don't get old when your hair turns gray, but when you stop defending what you built with your soul. Because that's what I had done. I defended my story. Not out of pride, but out of justice. Because if you stay silent, others think they can walk all over you forever. The next morning, I received another letter. This time from the court. It was the official closure of the case. My son had no way to appeal. The house was once again legally protected in my name without interference. I read it all calmly. I wasn't happy, but I felt firm, like a tree that after many storms is still standing with deeper roots. I decided to do something symbolic. I went to the back of the yard, where there was an old rose bush that my wife had cared for so lovingly. It was dry, abandoned for years. I knelt down, loosened the soil, pruned the dead branches, and planted a new rose bush. Not out of nostalgia, but out of hope. Because even though much has been lost, something can always bloom again. As I was working on it, I heard a voice behind me. It was Ethan. He came with a notebook in his hand. Grandpa, he said, in school they asked us to write about someone we admire, and I wrote about you. Can I read it to you? I wiped my hands on my pants and gestured for him to sit next to me. His voice trembled a little, but every word was like a balm to my soul. My grandfather is a man who doesn't shout, but he teaches, who doesn't hit, but makes it clear what is right. He didn't let himself be walked over even though they tried, and that's why I admire him. When he finished, I couldn't help but hug him. A long hug without words. Because in that instant, I felt that all the pain, the humiliation, the abandonment had been worth it, just for that moment. Because if I managed to make at least one person understand what respect, justice, and self-love are, then I didn't fail as a father or as a man. The days passed slowly but peacefully. The morning air had a different smell, as if the atmosphere knew that something in me had changed. I no longer woke up with a tight chest or a mind full of painful memories. I started dedicating myself to simple things, but things that had weight for me. Sweeping the patio, calmly painting the rusted gate, organizing the old photo albums, arranging the tools in the workshop out back that I had abandoned since my wife's death. Because after everything that happened, I understood something very clearly. You can lose people, you can lose connections, but as long as you don't lose yourself, something is saved. One morning while I was sharpening some old pruning shears, I heard someone calling from the gate. It was Larry, my lifelong friend. He came with his usual hat and a sincere smile, the kind that needs no explanation. Matthew, he said as soon as he came in, you have no idea how proud I am of you. What you did not, everyone can do. I invited him to sit in the shade of the orange tree, served him some cool lemon water, and we talked for a long time. He had been with me from the beginning, when I showed up at his house with a backpack on my shoulder after my son kicked me out. He offered me a corner, a blanket, and his silence. Because sometimes a true friend isn't the one who gives you solutions, but the one who sits with you and waits for the calm to return. "And what do you plan to do now?" he asked, looking at the new rosebush that was sprouting strongly. "Are you going to stay here alone?" I became thoughtful, not out of fear or sadness, but because that question touched a deep chord. What happens after a storm like that? Do you stand on the ruins or do you start building again? I answered him honestly. "I'm going to stay, Larry. But I'm not alone. I have Ethan, I have my peace, and I have my story. And that's more than enough." He nodded in silence with the wisdom that only years and life's blows can give. After Larry left, I sat down to write again. My notebook was already half full. It wasn't a diary. It was more of a legacy, a testament that we old folks are not finished, that we still have a voice, that we can also say enough and take the reins. I wrote a sentence that I later underlined heavily. It's not about being respected because you're old. It's about being respected because you gave everything. And that's what I had done. I gave it all. Time, money, care, a roof, advice. And when they betrayed me, I didn't respond with hatred, but with justice. Because justice isn't always shouted. Sometimes it's carried out in silence with papers in hand and your head held high. The next day, while preparing a chicken and vegetable soup, my late wife's recipe, I thought again about my son. Not as the man who kicked me out, but as the boy he once was, the one who would fall asleep on my chest, the one who would wait for me at the door with open arms when I came home from the construction site. And I wondered at what point he stopped seeing me as his father and started seeing me as an obstacle. Maybe it was modern life, maybe it was his ambition, maybe it was comfort. But whatever it was, it didn't justify what he did. You don't kick a father out of his house for convenience. You don't trade the person who gave you life for your wife's parents just because it's more comfortable. After lunch, I went out to water the plants and see how the rosebush was doing. It already had several new shoots. I watched it calmly, and suddenly an image crossed my mind. Myself old, but sprouting again. Because when you take care of yourself, listen to yourself, honor yourself, you also flourish, even if you've been stepped on before. That same afternoon, Ethan returned. He brought a small box wrapped in brown paper. "I brought you something we made in class, Grandpa. It's a model of our family." When I opened it, I saw cardboard figures. There was his mom himself, and a figure with a white beard and a hat. Clearly me. His father wasn't there. And before I could say anything, he explained. "The teacher told us to put the people who are really there for us." I shivered inside because I understood everything. That child had already chosen with his heart, without resentment, but with clarity. I hugged him tightly, and as I did, I felt a part of me, the part that was still bleeding, begin to heal. Because there is no balm more powerful than the sincere recognition of a grandson. More than an apology, more than an inheritance, more than any reparation, that simple cardboard model gave me back something I thought I had lost. Meaning. That night, I turned on the old lamp in the hallway, the same one I hung with my own hands more than 20 years ago, and I sat down to read the pages of my notebook from the beginning. There was sadness in there, yes, but also strength and a lot of truth. Because when you write from experience, every line is a closing scar. And when I reached the last page, I wrote in large letters, "The wound no longer bleeds. Now it is history. And this house, this life, this old man are still standing." A few days had passed since Ethan brought me that cardboard model. I kept it on the shelf next to a photo of my wife that I never moved. Every time I passed by, I looked at it and felt a strange mix of sadness and pride. Because in that simple gesture from my grandson, I understood that even though they had taken many things from me, they hadn't taken the most important thing, the respect of someone whose heart is still pure. That Sunday, I woke up with a special kind of calm. The sun was shining, and the breeze carried the smell of freshly baked bread from the neighbor's house. I made myself a coffee and sat on the porch with my old hat, the one I used to wear when we went to the farmer's market with my wife. As I took the first sip, I saw my son in the distance walking on the opposite sidewalk. He wasn't carrying anything, he wasn't dressed carelessly, but he no longer had that arrogant air. He was looking at the ground with his shoulders slumped. He saw me, but he didn't cross the street. He just lowered his gaze and kept walking. And in that moment, I understood that something in him had changed too. But it was too late. I remained silent. I didn't move, I didn't call him, I didn't yell at him. Because when someone decides to turn their back on their own blood, they also give up the words that one is no longer obligated to offer. Sometimes silence is the only way to say, "You can't enter here anymore." And not out of revenge, but out of dignity. That afternoon, I started organizing the house papers. Titles, receipts, deeds, the will, everything in order. With Ethan's name as the air crystal clear. I also wrote a letter for him. Not for now, but for when I'm gone. In it, I told him who I was, how I built this house, what I lived through, what I endured, and why I made the decision to leave everything to him. Because one day when he is a man, I want him to know that his grandfather did not let himself be crushed. That he acted with justice but also with love. A love that does not tolerate abuse but that builds with memory. While I was putting the documents away, I found an envelope with some old photos I hadn't seen in years. There we all were, my wife, my 3 young children, me with a sunburnt face and a tired but happy smile. I paused at one where my youngest son was hugging my neck with bare feet and a dirty face from playing so much. He was a happy, sweet boy, full of life. And I asked myself once again, where did he get lost? At what point did he stop seeing me as his father and start seeing me as an obstacle? Maybe I'll never have that answer. Maybe he doesn't have it himself. But I've learned that not all questions deserve an answer. Some just need time and distance. Over the next few days, I began to write what my grandson called Grandpa's Stories. It was a new notebook where every night before bed I wrote down an anecdote from my life. Some happy, some hard, but all true. I did it not for myself, but for those who come after. So that one day, if Ethan wants to tell his children who their great-grandfather was, he won't have to make anything up. He'll just have to read. One night while I was writing a story about how I met my wife dancing at a town festival, under paper lights with dusty shoes, I heard a light knock on the door. I opened it. It was Emily, alone with no makeup on and swollen eyes. She looked at me with an expression she had never shown before. Respect. "Mr. Roberts, I know I have no right, but I had to come." I nodded and offered her a seat on the porch bench. I said nothing. She began to speak with a broken voice. She told me that her life hadn't been easy since everything happened, that her parents had to go live with a sister, that my son had changed a lot, that he was depressed, that he spoke little. I listened in silence as I replied, "Everyone reaps what they sow. I gave you everything, and you chose to kick me out of my own house. Don't hate me for teaching you, though, that actions have consequences." She lowered her gaze. She wasn't looking for pity. She just wanted to say that despite everything, she was grateful for what I had done for her son in the past, that she now understood things she didn't see before. She said goodbye with a handshake. And as she left, I felt that at least on her part, a lesson had been learned. Not a reconciliation, but a recognition. The following days were more serene. I went back to planting corn in the small space behind the house. I bought paint and refinished the front door. I cleaned the windows inside and out. The house looked different, and so did I. Because when you clean your space, you also clean your soul. That same week, Ethan came to spend the night. We watched old movies. We ate bread with warm milk. And we talked about simple things. About the future, about what he wanted to study, about his dreams. He told me he wanted to be an architect, that he wanted to build houses like his grandfather. And then I knew that everything I lost was not in vain. That life took a son from me but gave me a grandson who inherited what matters, the value of truth, the weight of one's word, and the strength of someone who doesn't give up. There was something different in the air that morning. It wasn't just the weather or the birds singing in the orange tree in the yard. It was an internal feeling, as if my body was telling me something important is going to happen today. I got up slowly, stretching my bones, as if shaking off the dust of years. I prepared my breakfast calmly. Scrambled eggs, refried beans, and a little fresh cheese, and I sat down to eat at the usual table in front of the window overlooking the garden. The rose bush was in bloom, red, strong, open to the world. Like me, thought. Like me now. As I was clearing the plates, I heard a car engine stop in front of my house. I didn't look right away. There was no need. I felt who it was, and I wasn't wrong. A few seconds later, someone knocked on the front door. Firmly. 3 sharp knocks. I walked over. I opened it slowly. And there he was. My son. He was thinner. His hair was messy. The dark circles under his eyes were pronounced. His voice, however, came out calmly. "Dad, can I come in?" I looked at him without answering. I just stepped aside. He entered like someone not walking on their own ground, his eyes exploring the room as if he were seeing it for the first time. He sat on the edge of the sofa, his back straight, his hands clasped. I sat in front of him without rushing, without empty words. "I know I don't deserve to be here," he began. "And I didn't come to ask you for anything. I came because I needed to close this." I nodded, giving him permission to continue. After everything that happened, I was left with a lot of things inside. Resentment. Reproach, but also shame. A lot of it. I let myself be carried away by Emily, by the pressure, by plans that weren't mine. But in the end, the decision was mine. It was me who kicked you out. And you have no idea how many nights I've woken up thinking about that. Watching you walk out the door with your backpack. Me standing there thinking I was doing the right thing. I raised my hand gently, not with anger, but with clarity. "Son," I said, "memory is not erased with words. What you did was not a mistake. It was a choice, a very conscious one. It wasn't an impulse. It was cold, calculated, and it hurt, in a way you can't imagine. But I learned something. I don't need your forgiveness to be at peace. I needed my own. And I have it now." He fell silent. He swallowed hard. He lowered his gaze. I realized he wasn't expecting that. Maybe he came looking for an emotional moment, a scene of tears and hugs. But I was no longer that father who let everything slide for the sake of love. Not anymore. And not because I stopped loving him, but because I learned to love myself, too. "And now," he finally asked, "is there no longer a place for me in your life?" I looked at him firmly. "There is a place for those who respect, for those who acknowledge, for those who repair. not with words, but with actions. You still have a lot to learn. There was no shouting. There was no drama. Just that raw truth spoken from a heart that had healed with effort. He stood up. He extended his hand. I shook it. Not as a gesture of reconciliation, but of closure, of farewell. Maybe temporary, maybe permanent. He understood. He left in silence without looking back. And when I closed the door, I took a deep breath. I felt that the last link of the chain that tied me to the pain had broken. That same day I wrote again. Sometimes children get lost, not out of malice but out of cowardice. But a father is not obligated to carry that burden. He is obligated to live in truth, to set boundaries, to protect his peace. I dedicated the following days to myself. I went to the workshop out back and started building a small wooden bench. I wanted to put it under the rose bush, something simple but firm, like the foundations of this new stage I had built with my own hands. Ethan helped me sand it. Every time he came, he brought a new story from school about his plans, about his crazy ideas of designing floating houses or bridges that crossed rivers that didn't yet exist. And I just listened, smiling inside. Because in him there was something that had been lost in his father. The ability to see the other person, to look with love. One afternoon, while we were varnishing the bench, Ethan said to me, "You know, Grandpa, when I grow up, I want to build a house like this. Not the same on the outside, but the same on the inside. A house that has stories, silence, respect, and a garden where something important grows." I remained silent, watching the sun set between the branches of the orange tree. And I knew, without a doubt, that he had understood everything. That night, as I closed my notebook, I wrote, "The strongest tree is not the one that was never cut, but the one that knew how to grow new roots after the blow." And I fell asleep with a clear conscience. Not because everything ended well, but because I ended up true to myself. Today, I sat on the new bench for the first time. The rose bush next to me already has open, vibrant, firm flowers. The afternoon sun caressed my face while the wind moved the leaves, as if singing something that only old people understand. I closed my eyes for a moment and felt the light weight of years well lived. I don't have riches. I don't have crowds visiting me every Sunday. I don't have recognition in the newspapers or medals hanging on the wall. But I have peace. I have my story written with calloused hands and with decisions I didn't seek, but which I faced with my head held high. And that for me is worth more than any title. Months have passed since that last visit. My son hasn't returned, and I don't expect him to. Sometimes you don't need reconciliation to move forward. Sometimes forgiveness is not given aloud, but in the way one decides not to carry someone else's pain anymore. I let him go. And in that act, I also let myself go because I understood that the true punishment for those who hurt is not revenge, nor rejection, nor contempt. It is being left with the echo of their own decisions. He will live with that. I will not. Ethan still comes every weekend. Sometimes he stays overnight. Other times he just stops by for a while to say hello, to tell me things from school, to show me his drawings. The other day he brought me one of a house in the middle of the woods, with high ceilings, wooden walls, and a swing at the entrance. "It's your house, Grandpa," he told me. "But when I build it, you'll have one just like it in heaven." I laughed tenderly. And I also felt a lump in my chest because in his words there was a simple and powerful truth. The love we sow blossoms even when we are no longer here. The people in the neighborhood have started to look at me differently. Not as the old man who was kicked out of his own house, but as the man who knew how to defend his place with dignity. They greet me with respect. Some ask me how I did it, and I always give the same answer: by not staying silent about what hurts, by not bowing my head when they step on you, by not giving your heart to those who don't deserve it. Because if there's one thing I want to make clear before I go, it's that we old folks are not defeated. We are alive and we have a story, and a story is not for sale. I recently finished my notebook. 83 pages each with a part of me. I left it in a drawer with a note for Ethan. When I'm gone, read this slowly, not to cry, but to understand. There are no fairy tales here, only life, because that's what remains in the end, isn't it? The life we lived, what we did with what we were given. And me, with what I was given, I did the best I knew how. Maybe I wasn't perfect, but I was just. And that's enough. Today I also finished organizing my papers. Everything is clear, everything is signed. The house belongs to Ethan. Not because he's the favorite grandson, but because he was the only one who stayed when everyone else left. The only one who listened. The only one who asked for nothing, and yet gave me everything. My will doesn't have millions. It has this house, this garden, this rosebush, and my name written on every brick and every step of concrete and every crack that no longer hurts. Sometimes I feel lonely. Of course I do, I won't deny it. There are nights when I miss the laughter, the hugs of my children, when they were little, the voice of my wife in the kitchen. But loneliness is not always an enemy. Sometimes it's a teacher. It taught me to value myself, to listen to myself, to choose my battles, and above all, not to be afraid of silence, because in the silence I found truths that the noise never let me see. And if someone were to ask me if I would do it all the same again, I would say yes. That I would give again, trust again, build again, forgive again. But I would also close the door again when it was necessary, sign papers when others betrayed me, and plant a rose bush when everyone thought that ground was dead. Because as long as you can breathe, as long as you have your memory, you can always start over. Today, as I write these final lines, sitting under the sun, with moist eyes, but a straight back, I have only one thing left to say. If you who are listening to me are going through something similar, do not stay silent. Do not forget yourself. Sometimes even love needs a limit, because whoever doesn't respect you doesn't deserve to stay. And whoever values you would never put you out on the street. And that is why, my dear friend, that I say with my hand on my heart, it is never too late to return to your center. It is never too late to take your place. Now you tell me, if you had been in my place, what would you have done? And also tell me, where are you listening from today? Because if this story touched your heart, maybe it was just what you needed to hear.